Thank you for joining. You're about to hear our first episode of the Learning Lever podcast with Moon and myself, talking a little bit about the origins of Rise Sports Collective. Future episodes will feature industry leaders and operating experts and have a little bit more structure to them. But for now, hopefully enjoy a little bit about how Rise came to be and why we feel the need for a learning focused company in the business of sports. Enjoy. So here we are. We're finally at our first episode of the Learning Lever. And we've been talking about having this for a while. And I know we're going to get into a lot of episodes with operating experts and those in the industry and dive into their roles and how they've leveraged learning and what they're doing. But today, a little bit of a nuance. With the first episode, we have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the origin of Rise, how Moon and I came together, and really what a learning company can be in a very specific industry. Like, how does that happen and why does that need to happen? So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today, and maybe set up a little bit of foreshadowing of what's to come in future episodes with other operating experts and industry experts. But for the first part, Moon, we've been talking for a while. Take me back again. People can look at your LinkedIn profile and see where you've been, but when you have to introduce yourself, where do you start in terms of your career, life, and or with learning and or sports? Like, it's all things. Where do you want to take us from your journey?
Great question, Ryan. And it's always an interview question I ask people too. I ask them, tell me a little bit more about yourself, or help me understand you a little bit better. And what I'm really always looking for is a little bit of personality, and I'm trying to understand the person. And
Yeah.
so instead of giving
Yeah.
you my background and my career, as you mentioned, you could find on LinkedIn, I'll give you a little bit of the personal. And so I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm just a kid from Cleveland. And
Nice.
in Cleveland, I think there's a ton of sports fans. And you might be the first person to say nice when I say I'm from Cleveland. Usually people say I'm sorry, which is
It's up and
not
coming
usually my
now. I mean,
favorite
it's a
response.
sports place now. It's always been one, but now it's another level.
Oh, we could talk through some new sports pieces that they're doing in Cleveland that are putting it on the map, which I definitely love. But bringing it back and definitely grew up in Cleveland, big sports fan, and then I went to college in the Midwest. I wanted to stay in the Midwest. Went to Northwestern outside of
Yeah.
Chicago in Evanston, and I really studied psychology and econ, so nothing to do with sports at all. And I started my career in strategy consulting, but I did that basically because it was a passion of mine as well. I lived in Chicago for 10 years outside of undergrad,
Yep.
and really predominantly most of my friend set is from the Chicago area. And when I get together with them, we really just love to travel. We love food, we love travel, and we love going to sporting events. And so, go figure, I ended up with the career in sports with somebody that loves to travel and go to sporting events. Um,
Nice.
yeah, and then once I started my career in Chicago, and then from there I moved over to the Bay Area and worked for the 49ers. More importantly, on the very first day I moved to San Francisco, I met my wife, and
Nice. I didn't know
uh,
that was the first day you moved to San Francisco.
it actually really was the first day I moved to San
Wow.
Francisco. So my wife, me and her met because we lived in the same apartment building, and she was a little bit of the neighborhood watch for our apartment building that we lived in. And she lived in apartment 401, and I lived in apartment 408. And so on the day I moved into my apartment, I saw her, and we'll have a debate over who knocked on whose door first. But one thing led to another, and 10 years later, we're married.
Amazing. Okay. So San Francisco, you're not there now. How long were you in San Francisco?
I was in San Francisco for about a decade. So I moved to San Francisco primarily for my job at the San Francisco 49ers. Prior to that, I was in business school in Chicago and applying for different jobs at that time. And we could walk through that a little bit later, and ended up getting a job with the San Francisco 49ers. And it was my break into sports. And so
Yeah.
moved to the Bay Area in 2013 and started with the 49ers, where I worked for about 10 years.
Okay. Now, since this is an origin discussion, a little bit about the company, and because that started then, I know you've had a little bit, we'll get into the journey a little bit more, but when did the learning idea of a company and or in sports become more than just what it is for everyone, which is part of normal corporate culture or part of normal getting a job? When did you have a different connection to learning in the sense of it might be something that you lean into more than the average?
Absolutely. And Ryan, honestly, I think that that answer for me comes at a very, very young age. And
Okay.
so, my grandfather was actually a high school principal, and my dad is very much into history and is very much
Okay.
about education. And actually, if you really want to take it way back, I'm not even sure if you know this, but my name is actually Mamoon. It's not Moon, and most people on the podcast will not know that. And Mamoon founded the first library in the world in 786 BC. So I was
I
named
did not
after
know
the
that part.
person that started the first library. So maybe it was all meant to be in terms of a
Destiny. All right.
yeah, and a thirst for knowledge and learning. But I've always really had a strong curiosity, desire to learn, and desire to teach as well. When I was working in Chicago, I did take some time off, and I used to teach English. And so I spent 3 months in Argentina. I spent 3 months in Brazil teaching English in favelas or underprivileged areas,
Yep.
and that really resonated with me. And then you fast forward, most of my nonprofit work as I've really progressed in my career has been centered around education and training and teaching. I've been a board member for Junior Achievement for the better part of 2 decades in Chicago and then San Francisco, and will join it fairly shortly as soon as I can get a little bit more settled here in the Baltimore area. But my journey from like a learning and training, I think, goes back all the way from when I was a young person.
Okay, so how does it get to we're going to do a business or you're going to found something? Like how does that happen? Because that's definitely a we're talking about the learning lever. That's
Yeah.
turning and pulling a new lever at some point. When does that start to crystallize?
Great question. I think it was definitely on many a late night when I was at working with the San Francisco 49ers. And um, as I mentioned, I like to learn. I'm curious, and so I'd always read articles. And I think there's a couple different articles that really had hit me at the time. And so one, there was an article that talked about the rising cost of education and how education is growing at like a 20 to 30% CAGR versus inflation might be at 4%. So I think at the time, looking at even how much the college that I went to and how much it went up in cost and
Yeah.
um, college and education, it's very expensive. And so that sort of got my mind thinking about things. And I started to look into like master's programs versus like an MBA or different types of programs. And so I started to see that programs that were more focused on a particular skill set or industry and masters were a little bit more affordable, and B, were starting to gain in popularity. And then I think I paired that with the thought of my first job out of undergrad was working at LEK Consulting. And my first week of work, they sent me away to Boston and I got trained for a week. And that training, I think, fundamentally really changed the course of my career and really helped me out. And I had thought maybe when I got the job that I had the skill set based off of what I did in college and I was eager. And then I went to that training and realized that I knew absolutely nothing. And when I say absolutely nothing, I mean I knew zero. And everything that I learned in that training.
Okay,
Um,
so let's take that for just a
yeah.
minute. We're going to go off tangent a little bit here because I think this is one of the things that I'm very aware of is that when learning is done well, it resonates. We all have learning that's like, oh, I can't wait for this to end. I got to get out of here. This is enough. Like, and it can still be helpful, but there's that painful piece. But I feel like when we talk to people about learning and what resonated or why and when it was valuable, they have one of those moments in a job or in their career beyond their favorite teacher in grade school where it's like, oh, this company or this trainee or this internship, there's a work learning experience that happens at some point that most people can say they've had on some level, but it's usually one or two versus they might have taken 50 courses. So if you go back to that particular program, like, can you describe anything about why that was so formative and how it's managed to stay in your mind for as long, whereas other training that we've all taken kind of comes in and goes out? What was it about it that was so significant?
To me, I think there were a couple pieces, and one,
Okay.
it was very applicable. And so everything they did in college was very abstract or theoretical.
Yeah.
And I was learning from textbooks, but I wasn't actually learning what I would do on the actual job itself. So in that training for example, we had Excel training and we built Excel models. And I had never even opened up Microsoft Excel, really, I think up until that point. I probably
Fair.
had, but I really hadn't.
Fair.
And I got trained in it over 3 days and got to learn how to build a model. We got to learn how to build presentations and we walked through
Yeah.
different templates. And then ultimately, even just the aspect of learning from all these individuals that were very professional and how they went about the way they taught and trained, and there's a specific way they did it. And it's even just taking notes on sort of the professionalism and how they were addressing and talking to people were things I think I noticed.
Yeah.
And just overall on I think it was like from going straight from undergrad and then starting the job and it was just corporate like and sort of understanding. I think I was sort of blown away. I was like, oh, this is real now. Like this is serious and I should take this seriously. And I think the practicality of it. And then immediately after the training, I was able to implement what I learned. And so like in the first week, it was I had to build a model, I had to do a presentation, and I was like, oh, thank God I did that training. Otherwise, like I would have known what to do at all.
Okay. I love it. All right. Um, I kind of want to see, does that connect to, I wanted to call that out. Like, I know I'm kind of deciding which way to go here for a minute because I absolutely think that that is one of those values we want to capture when it comes to talking about learning is the mix of knowledge, skills, context, usefulness, applicable. Like it really is a lot of things have to come together for learning to be really powerful and effective for an individual and an organization. It's easy to go one or the other. And that seems like that program hit that kind of sweet spot of helping you a lot to do a job for an organization that needed it done. Take me to the moment where you're going to now start a company to do that in some capacity. Where does that register and what were your first ideas of Rise? Obviously we've gone through some iterations. Like what were some of the first ideas and how did those kind of come up for you?
So really, as I was sitting there, I think on one of those late nights and like reading these articles, and that's really the start of any idea. You sit
Sure.
there and then you start to write it down and say like, okay, I think that there might be a need for training within sports. I didn't get any training or development when I started to work in sports, and it would have been nice to have received that like I did when I worked in strategy consulting. So I put the idea down on paper, and then like I do with every idea that I have and what I'd recommend to everyone, I shared it. I shared it with a lot of people. What do you
Yeah.
think of this idea? Do you think this is good? Do you think it's not? And I got a tremendous amount of feedback on the idea and incorporated some feedback, made the idea stronger, expanded on the idea. And then eventually, as it goes, I pitched it to my boss, Al Guido, who is the president of the 49ers, and he was intrigued by the idea. So we talked about it. I fleshed out a little bit more, and we probably iterated on this idea back and forth over the course of the next several years. And I had maybe 10 or 20 different projects or work streams I was working on at the time. So
Yeah.
on my late nights, because this was really sort of my quote unquote extra credit that I could do, I would spend a little bit more time noodling it and advancing the idea further. Um, when and I think my wife sort of tells me this all the time, and Al would always tell me this is Al would probably give me about 10 no's before he would give me a yes. And so I never got a yes one time ever on my first pitch ever. And I don't think I think it's really hard to get a yes on your first pitch. But eventually I think I wore him down and it got to the place where he thought it was an interesting idea and something that we should potentially pursue.
Okay, so you've pitched it to Al. Why didn't you just start it with Al? What happened then?
Oh man, great question. And sometimes life just hits. And I think right at the time when we started to get the yes, an opportunity presented itself to move over to Elevate and to open up our London office. And from a life experience, I really wanted the ability to live abroad with my wife. And me and my wife had explored several opportunities living in Europe, and this one was just something that we could not pass up. So as I was leaving the 49ers, it was one of the things I negotiated with Al on my exit was making sure that I could have the IP associated with what's now Rise Sports Collective. And that might have been what quote unquote what you might think of to be the start, but in reality, the start comes with when I started talking to you. And so now we're gonna just seg into like how I met Ryan here, just sort of casually. And so Ryan, well, actually, Ryan, why don't you take how I met you real quick, and then I'll flip it back to me, and I'll sort of fill in like how Rise started based off of that. But where did I meet you, Ryan?
It is one of those serendipitous things. So I was my wife and I bought tickets to go to 49ers season tickets when they built Levi Stadium, and the big thing there for us was the Mina tailgate. I'm a huge food guy. I've got some cooking chops for sure, and they were building
What do
this
you mean by
incredible.
Mina's tailgate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Levi Stadium had this incredible hospitality thing where you paid an extra fee on top of your tickets, but you had access to this very exclusive, amazing space in the stadium with amazing food and beverages and people before the game for like 3 or 4 hours. Plus, you could do events. It was amazing.
Hey, shout out Michael Mina, Chef Michael Mina, James
Absolutely.
Beard Award winning chef, 30 plus restaurants and a good friend. But those are great party and tailgate.
It was epic, and I mean, they're still friends of ours. The people that we met there are. I went to a Sharks game last night with friends from the tailgate meeting, and so it was one of those very special, cool places where you met a lot of people and you saw them 15 times a year for games and then for special events, one-offs, movie in the stadium, and things like that. And you were one of the people that helped put it together, if not the person that was putting it together. And you'd come and talk to me, and I'd be like, here's some feedback, here's an idea, and we would kind of start talking that way, and you're like, here's some field passes, check it out. I mean, it was definitely just a part of the experience for me for the first couple years we knew each other. In all honesty, it was through that experience of the tailgate.
I think we built the early basis of a good, strong working relationship with me being a focus group moderator and you being a
True.
participant. And true in the truest of sense. You are the most reasonable person I've ever had in a focus group session. Whereas most people come to a focus group and they're just ready to just dump everything on you that they have experienced. And I sometimes feel like they don't think that people on the other side are actually trying to do the work to like make it a better experience. But every time you would bring up some feedback, it would always come in a very reasonable way. So I would Ryan would be my little I would secretly tell him about all plans that were coming in the future, and I would get Ryan's opinion as a fan, so I could understand how a fan might feel about it, without sort of releasing it to everyone and getting yelled at. But Ryan would give me some good feedback, and then we fast forward to like it was 10 years later. So after 10 seasons
Yeah,
of really having feedback from Ryan, I tell him one day when we're hanging out in the United Club, which we turned into an all-inclusive experience. We're the first stadium in the world to really have all-inclusive for all season ticket holders. And I remember chatting with you and saying like, "Hey, I'm leaving the 49ers, and I'm going over to Elevate." And we had such a good conversation at that point. And you then asked me like, "Hey, so what are you thinking about doing next?" And I
yeah,
really told you that I was going to Elevate, but then I told you about my passion and the idea behind Rise, which at the time was called Academy Co.
yeah.
Because I had to come up with a name for
I
it.
remember.
And then you told me, you look at me and you say, "Hey, Moon, like you know that my whole entire career is based on learning, and that I'm a chief learning officer." And I looked at you and I go, "Ryan, I am such a terrible person. I literally have never asked you what you've done. I have only asked you like what you feel about like your experience, and I've only asked you questions that could benefit like the 49ers, and I haven't asked you, so I need to be a better person and a
Well,
better
not
friend."
in truth. You asked about my daughter, my wife, and family, and golf and other things. Maybe not the job,
That's
but we
true.
talked cooking. We talked other stuff. So I won't say you're a horrible person for that, but it did not. It's also not what I talk about. It's not my go-to at the end of the day. But I will say I remember you sharing the deck, and I was like, okay, if you're gonna do it right, because I
Yes.
certainly had opinions about what learning needs to be in a business and for
Yeah.
jobs. Like there's academic
Yeah.
learning and there's knowledge and there's skills and there's a way to do it and a way not to. And we've seen both. Learning's a
Yeah.
very interesting industry.
D-
So I certainly was opinionated right off the bat.
You were. Do you remember where our first meeting was, where we discussed Rise?
I either the golf course
It
or
was the golf
the
course.
golf course. I would say the golf course or maybe one of the restaurants after or during, but definitely golf course.
It was the golf course, and we spent like the whole round, and we were the
Yeah.
actually we didn't actually talk work for the first 9 holes. We kind of
No.
just were shooting the shit and hanging out. And then I remember like walking away from that day of golf and being like, "Oh man, like." like this would be like literally the perfect fit. Like this would be the perfect
Thank you.
fit
Thank you. That's
for
very
to
nice.
start this off. And you can have the sports side and you can have the learning side, and we can work together. And I just didn't know if there's any way that you would want to partner up or join. And so I remember like the next week I sort of talked to you, was like, hey, like why don't you like think about becoming a board member or advisor for us? I could like really
You slow
use you.
played me. You slow played me
Yeah,
well. You're like, advise, help a little, and be a, and now how about co-found and also help
yeah,
run and let's build. You played it well. Like you
100%.
played me very well. Like there's no way around that. That's very true. I was just an advisor at one point, and then it was like a little bit more and a little bit more. And quite honestly, like, and this is again because it's an origin, I'll say it was very much an opportunity to really take what I had been doing for 20 years for tech companies like LinkedIn and Yahoo and Walmart and all these companies and solve a real different type of learning problem. Like sports teams have a very interesting size
Yeah,
challenge, and they have an interesting diversity of role challenge, and they have a motivated employee base, which is
yeah,
awesome. And they had a mixed bag of learning in the past when it comes to for individual roles in a really specialized industry. And so that
yeah.
was a unique and very cool challenge from a learning standpoint. So all those things were definitely drawing me into the discussion and the problem more and more for sure.
Absolutely. And then, as you think about it, just being able to like work with you and your learning experience, one of the things that I've always taken as a piece of advice, I'll sort of shout out Damian Atkins, who I think is now the general counsel for Mr. Beast, which
Wow. I
the
love it. Very cool.
largest influencer in the world. And he's actually my cousin, and I like he's a little bit older than me. And I remember when I got my first job managing, and I asked him for a piece of advice. I looked up to him, and he said, "Hire the person that's not you." And he's like, "You can do you. Just hire the person that's not you." And so I kept that into like for every role I've had at the 49ers, Elevate, and I really keep that into consideration. And um, as a founder, and even like within any job as a leader, I think many leaders try and do everything all at once. And so I had this sort of thought that like, the best leaders are pole vaulters, not decathletes. And so you're going to be like really good at something. When you try and be really good at everything, I think that can
Yeah.
start to fail. And so I recognized very quickly I had a passion or dream to start a learning company. I know a lot about sports. I don't know anything about building a learning or training company. And so then when I really like after we had golfed together and we had worked together and had such we didn't work together after we had talked for 10 years informally, where I literally like
Yeah.
text in like we like worked together like
Yeah.
very well without working together. And the fact that we had two disparate skill sets that you needed to put this company together, it couldn't have been more. I think you said serendipitous. I'd say kismet. Like
Yeah.
it couldn't have been more of that. Like
Well, and
and
I'll say this like 2 years of doing this now, 2+ years of doing this, it's the amount of nuance and intrigue and challenge around the sports industry. Like this was a brand new industry for me, and your experience in there, your network, the people
yeah,
that have been on our advisor groups and our curriculum committees, like this has been a ride to say the least because it is a very complex and interesting world that is night and day different than say the tech world that I was a little more familiar with and massive, multiple thousands of employee companies and trying to solve hundreds of employee company problems, but
yeah.
still problems. So again, it was one of those things where the learning challenge was very different. The network that you had built up, the relationships you had built up were integral for this to work. This company doesn't work without excellent operating experts, which is what we're going to kind of lean into in a minute here. Which is, in fact, let's do that. Like we talked about
It's
this. We didn't just go out and say, hey, let's teach some skills. Like, hey, here's a skill for this. Here's a skill for this. Here's some knowledge on that. The first thing we went and did is figure out how to find the right people. The knowledge, the skills, and the context. And I don't care who you are, the context of what you're learning and how it applies to what you're going to do is the secret sauce in those most memorable learning journeys.